Welcome to the season 2 of the India Energy Hour podcast. The India Energy Hour podcast explores the most pressing hurdles and promising opportunities of India's energy transition through an in-depth discussion on policies, financial markets, social movements, and science. The podcast is hosted by energy transition researcher and author Dr. Sandeep Pai and senior energy and climate journalist Shreya Jay. The show is produced by multimedia journalist Tejas Dayananda Sagar.
India's renewable energy sector is facing an unusual dilemma. On one side are the ambitious targets set out by the government, and on the other are problems and issues that come with rampant growth and increase in size of the industry. One such issue is the GIB or Great Indian Bustard case in Rajasthan and Gujarat, where 20 gigawatt of solar and wind power projects face an uncertain future. Plant in the breeding areas of GIB and endangered bird, green energy and ecology are in direct conflict. Subrahmanyam Pulipaka is leading the fight from the end of the industry. He is CEO of National Solar Energy Federation of India, a non-profit, non-government representative body of the solar sector in the country. Having dabbled both research and project development career paths, Subrahmanyam is looking at ways and means for both energy and ecology to coexist. Welcome to the India Energy Hour podcast, Subra. We are delighted to have you with us to discuss all what's giving you sleepless nights.
So, hello, Subrahmanyam. Thank you so much for joining us here. It's our pleasure and our delight to finally have you here. You are pretty famous in the sector. If I were to just mention your name, that would be enough for people to come and listen to this episode. We have been trying to catch you for our episode for quite some time. And I must say that you're famous for all the right reasons. You have been pitching so many issues of the sector in the government. You yourself are a very assertive voice for different kind of matters and issues that matter for the renewable energy sector. So we thought that it would be a good idea to get you here to talk about so many things that are happening in this sector all at once. What kind of opportunities or hiccups that you see out there, and probably we can discuss little bit of solutions at our end. So thank you once again to join us here at the India Energy Hour.
No, thank you very much, Shreya. And first of all, thanks for having me here. I must say I'm a very big follower, or rather an ardent follower of the podcast. And thanks again for that kind introduction. And it's good to know that I am more famous than infamous in the sector. So that's a good relief. But I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. So before we go into this very excited, interesting discussion over renewable energy sector where issues and counter issues don't seem to end, let's just first start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? What did you study? And how did you land into this sector? And then specifically into what I say policy advocacy, if I might be right. Your gamut is very wide. I just say that word, but you'll be a better person to explain that yourself.
Well, it has been a very interesting journey that led me to here, I can say. Coming from Hyderabad, graduating from BITS Pilani, I was very much interested in going towards the technical side of the things. During my undergraduate days, I was very much involved in solar reliability related research, having published around 15 research articles during my BTech days itself at BITS. So my interest always lied towards the technology, especially in the solar, towards the reliability of PV modules. So my main area of research and interest was the soiling on modules, and Pilani is in Rajasthan, one of the most arid regions of the country, and that's also the region with the highest potential of the country, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it a lot of times, and now today and for the nearest future to come. So that's how I entered this field as sort of a technical person. Then after my graduation, I went on to work briefly for one of the largest companies, private sector companies in the country. Then, seeing myself in a role where I'm not able to contribute to solar didn't feel good. So I immediately left my job and started my own startup for solar. It was predominantly in real-time monitoring and preventive maintenance of solar plants. The tagline of our startup was "Make more hay while the sun shines," and I must confess that I did make more hay when the sun shined. When that particular segment of solar market was very, very nascent, we got good traction, and I've been fortunate to have Government of India as one of our first client. So that's where I was introduced to the world of policy advocacy and all. And it would be an understatement if I say I was the last one to think that I'll be featuring anywhere near the policy narrative. But things have their own way of happening. But yes, from there, during my startup days, I was very much in regular interaction with policymakers, with the ministry, some of the industry CEOs and all. And I was drawn to policy more than I ever thought I would. And finally, 4 years back, when I was 24 years old, our chairman, Mr. Mehta, has offered me this job. I didn't believe when he offered me the job, but 4 years down, we are here. And I can promise you one thing, and with full conviction, that there isn't an uneventful day or even an hour in this line of work. And I think that's what keeps us going and in doing what we are doing. So that's a brief journey of how I ended up here doing the policy advocacy.
No, that's great. And I've been always interested to, ask you, this is a very nascent sector, compared to other infrastructure sectors, or for that matter, other nascent sectors also, be it telecom, IT. I think the next biggest comparison would be e-commerce or IT. And these two sectors face the same issue, if I can call them issue, that policies are still under construction, right? They're just coming up. They're coming up, keep getting changed, and new things come up. So I can understand when you say that you never have an uneventful day. But what is a day like for someone who's trying to pitch the demands of the industry to the government, which is yet to make up its mind on what to do with this sector?
That's a very interesting question. And I think I have an equally interesting answer, because I divide my day into three parts. And based on the things that come to my desk, I judge whether that day was the most eventful day or not. And believe me, the most difficult and the most interesting part is firefighting. There are issues, like you mentioned, we are a very new sector and a pretty dynamic sector. There are issues that crop up at every juncture of a plant, starting from the tendering process to the bidding, to the signing, to the commissioning, to the evacuation, to the selling, and then to the payment. So everywhere you have one or the other issue cropping up, and sometimes those issues are something which you didn't even think might be a problem or might cause concern at any given point of time. So it's safe to say 80% of my time goes into firefighting. All calls we get are, it would be an understatement to say that those calls are panic calls, but all these calls are mission critical calls that we are getting. So predominantly, the major chunk of my day goes into firefighting. The second part of any conventional day is on the proactive advocacy. Our government, we have to give a credit where it is due, that even though we are at a very nascent stage, we are at the stage where Germany or UK were 8-10 years back, but we have very quickly evolved into a mature market from a developing market. That only happened because of a lot of proactive initiatives from the government side and from the sector side. Like, I'll tell you things like net metering, which almost 8-9 years back were something that we could not even think of, today have become mainstream. That requires a proactive advocacy from bodies like us. So that is where we would also like to spend more time on. Like, for example, I can give you on my desk currently, PV recycling, agri PV are on the top list of proactive advocacy. And we are seeing some good movement from the government. So these are the things that we do when it comes to, the proactive part. The third part of the day, which also happens to be another equally interesting part, is how to ensure Indian solar industry is able to sustain in the country, at the same time act as a guiding force for other countries. So we have especially in the last 4 years, expanded our reach. By our reach, I mean not only NSEFI, but our industry's reach to different countries, especially in the Gulf, in Southeast Asia, in Africa, where now we have access to their market, they have access to our knowledge, our, how to execute things, where we did wrong and what we did right. So that is, I think, for me, another interesting part of my day. So generally, these three are the main things that happen in a day. And there's a big list of things that happens, a lot of to and fro with the ministries, from the central side, from the state side, interministerial issues. Sometimes we need to also, as an industry body, it's essential to bring the industry onto a single thought process on key issues. So, consensus building, a thought leadership for things that can help Indian solar sector, Indian renewable sector. So yeah, all in all, this is what compresses of one normal day. But I would consider a day very successful if my firefighting is less and my proactive advocacy is more. But I must confess that unfortunately, I've been lately more firefighting than trying to advocate more proactively. And this is also something that we are currently working on.
And at the risk of sounding ageist, which at my age I shouldn't, but what it is like to, deal with the other side. I'm talking about corporates, and this sector is a good mix. We are having traditional infrastructure companies which have forayed into green energy, and we have good set of entrepreneurs which have started their business journey in this sector, and they are young people, they are people who are coming from traditional companies. What it is like to manage that kind of public egos and all that?
Well, I won't call them egos, but and I understand your question, because we have people who have been from the traditional business background, from infrastructure side or telecom side. In fact, some of them have started their careers in renewables and now have become big entities, and some of them are coming from the traditional power sector. So we have a mix of all these professionals inside it, and I must say, in one word to sum it up, it's a never ending learning experience while interacting with them, because people who have seen thermal background have a kind of wisdom that is very rare to get. The thermal sector in its infancy, where renewable or solar is now today, so that evolution is something that they can capture. It's just in front of them in reels. And infrastructure in perspective is of course very important for the sector today. We have quickly scaled from solar being a small scale industry to now gigawatt scale parks. If we talk about, when I went to Europe, I told them we have 100 megawatt for breakfast. They said, no, you'll have 1 gigawatt for breakfast. That's the kind of scale India is building up. So infrastructure thought process plays an important role in that. And there are times where we appreciate their perspective more than we think we should. And I think overall, these last 4 years, if any, have been a real testament to me on one particular aspect, that solar is a very unique industry, or even renewables is a very unique industry, and solar especially, where every sector, every industrial sector has one way or the other way to contribute to it. That's why you have various, the range of varieties of players that exist in the market. If you see, you have someone who owns, I don't want to name, but who owns a conventional infrastructure business in solar, who owns a jewelry business in solar, who owns ports into solar. So that's the kind of, the mix that we are seeing in the industry is, I don't know, you can't match it to any other sector. And of course, there are private sector PSUs, public sector undertakings, who are also playing an important role. And if you see, they either come from the conventional energy generation background, or hydro, or other large scale energy or infrastructure development projects. So I think the experience has been very good. And I, to some extent, if you ask me, I will elude the success so far we've achieved to this mix of ideas, variation in the advocacy, and most importantly, the kind of value they bring to the table when any discussion happens.
No, that's great to know. And given that you have had such a great learning experience, I think we can now move on to, the issues that are there. You rightly mentioned that there is a certain set of knowledge that the traditional power sector people get into this sector, which then turns out to be beneficial for people dealing with the issues in the renewable energy. And this holds more importance than ever. And we have discussed this, that the kind of issues that solar sector or renewable sector in general is facing these days is something that traditional energy, conventional power or infrastructure sector have faced in their lifetime and continue to face because of the policy or because of the demography of the country, whatever be it. So that brings me to the first question, which is a very pressing issue. And because in the recent year, land and ecology has become a huge concern for green energy projects. When solar kick started a decade back, or when wind energy came to force, say, a 2 decades back, it was championed as a green cause, they were green energy, and there was no concern per se, if I may say so. Lack of awareness is another reason for that. But now we see these issues cropping up every day. Even the industry has complaints about land availability. Going to the first issue, these land and ecology issues that have come up, can you first elaborate and tell our listeners what these are? What is the genesis?
So when we started, like you mentioned, our solar energy journey, we had a very clear cut, or rather a humble target of 20 gigawatt by 2022. And our plans were according to that. But when we had the new government in 2014, we had a new target of 100 gigawatt, out of which 60 gigawatt comes from utility scale, that's ground mounted, grid connected, and then the 40 gigawatt comes from rooftop. Now, first of all, we can all agree that the availability of land as a resource is abundant in the country. We are a subcontinent, we are the seventh largest country in the world. But when we look at these mega scale projects that we want to build, we have to bring a lot of different landholders, land chunks together. So that is in itself a challenge. And we have clear mandate in terms of the kind of land use that can be accorded to renewable energy or solar, mostly the arid, semi-arid lands. And there will be a time where we will not have access to these lands anymore. We'll be running out of these lands. So I think we are slowly coming to that stage where we are seeing increasing issues. One, on the way we are able to collect different land owners, land masses together, which in itself is a big pain issue. And second, the availability of land, the allocation is also not happening at a pace we think it should be, or we would have wished it should be. So land availability, and even after availability, the legal part, the compilation part, and having that entire land as a whole chunk is something that is now turning out to be an increasing problem for the sector. We have been requesting government's intervention on this time and again. Fortunately, we have received positive response. We had some issues last year for land allocation in Gujarat, which was later resolved with the government intervention. Early this year, we had something similar in Karnataka, which is, I think, now at the verge of getting solved. We are very hopeful and positive about that. But it will only keep on growing. There's no doubt in that. As a country, our renewable energy installations will grow, but our land mass will remain the same. So we have to acknowledge the fact that there will be more and more complications in the land issue in the coming future. We have, of course, suggested a framework for the government on how to increase the effective land use and ensure that the land use ratio is increased. I'll talk about that in a later part of our discussion. But this is in brief the issue of land. On the ecology, if you say, I mean, overall in the country, I don't think we are facing any challenges. But yes, the GIB issue is something that has been a problem. I won't say rather a categorically a problem, but we have been as an industry trying to address that since almost 2 years. And yes, we did run into some speed breakers in this journey. And yeah, the speed breakers literally have slowed down our speed, I should say.
I'll go one issue by one. Let's start with this issue which has given sleepless night to public sector, private sector companies all across for the past 2 years now, I think more than that. GIB, or Great Indian Bustard, is an endangered bird which is native to areas in Rajasthan, Gujarat, which border Pakistan. And solar projects which were planned in this state were alleged by several environmentalists and agencies that it falls under the GIB occupied area. And these projects, when they come up, or rather the transmission lines connected to this project, would lead to, fatal accidents for these birds. I want to understand from you that what exactly on the ground is the issue, what led to this furore, and what kind of impact is it having on the sector? Because there are numbers floating around that this much gigawatt, that much gigawatt. Even states and center is together on this issue, and so are several companies. What is it?
Well, I've spent almost many sleepless nights in the last 2 years addressing the Great Indian Bustard issue. And if we go to the root cause of it, like you rightly mentioned, the western part, especially the northwestern part of our country, has the significant population of GIBs. And they are a migratory bird and they fly at lower altitudes and they don't have frontal vision, but they have lateral vision. So we have received some reports early 2019 about the possible, the collision of GIBs with the transmission lines in that sector. During that time, this installation rate in that area was also not much. Predominantly, there was wind, but solar installations were comparatively less. And then there was a discussion established between the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the private sector, the government, and then there were some, land areas identified where it was suggested that we use some preventive measures like bird diverters. Then there was a petition that was filed in the National Green Tribunal by some environmentalists on the same. And as NSEFI also we have represented. Because here we should understand two things. While this area is predominantly place where you find the major chunk of GIB population, coincidentally that is the area which has the highest potential of renewable energy, especially that of solar in the country. And as a sector, while we were trying to explain our concerns to both NGT and also Supreme Court consequently, which I'm going to tell you now, we made sure we were clear on two fronts. One, no one in the sector, no one in the country can be against or can willingly, harm a bird. And we are not an exception. We won't and we shouldn't. But we also feel very strongly that GIBs, the birds, and the renewable power generation ecosystem can coexist. And to show this, we set up a team which tried to analyze the kind of similar bird collision activities with power lines in different countries, and especially in the same bustard family in UK, in Namibia, in Europe. There were similar cases, and we are not the first ones to find ourselves in this tricky position where you have to choose between infrastructure or you have to choose between a bird, because there is no choice. That's an obvious choice. You cannot willingly harm a bird. At the same time, we cannot compromise on infrastructure. So we should find a way where both of them can coexist. That is when we tried to plead our case to NGT, and the National Green Tribunal has given a direction. But of course, by the time the tribunal has given its judgment, the case went to Supreme Court. So their judgment was subjected to Supreme Court judgment. But they said that yes, the areas where we think the prevalence of the bird is higher, you underground transmission lines, and the areas where the incidence rate is less and the birds movements are less, which is potential kind of area, there you can have bird diverters which can help the bird, guide the bird and prevent its collision with the transmission lines. So this happened, and this was a judgment from NGT, but it was subjected to Supreme Court judgment. Then it went to Supreme Court. We implied in Supreme Court, and we again gave our version and what we think is the best solution, and how as a sector we are ready. We are ready to start breeding programs. We are ready to start cohabitation programs there and ensure that the population of GIB increases in that area while not compromising on our goals. Because today, if you see, there's no doubt in saying India is the leader. We are home to one of the world's largest ambitious renewable energy programs. And if we do things right, 1 out of 3 solar installations in the world will come in India in the next 10 years. And that's huge. That's the kind of market we are doing. While we are talking about the sector and its growth, we should also look at the other side of the angle, which is how we are helping combat climate change. And if 50-60% of our mix is coming from renewables, then that's a huge achievement for a country like India. And we are the only G20 country which is in line to achieve its goals and has already achieved its NDCs. So all the progress we have made shouldn't be left unturned. That was our submission to the Honorable Supreme Court. April 2021, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has directed all the lines to be undergrounded. Now, if you look at developing countries, even there, undergrounding was the last resort. Especially the high voltage lines, undergrounding is very difficult. And difficult, it is not on the technical side, it's on the safety side too. Let's look at it from 3 angles. One, from technical side, it's not feasible. From the economical side, it's going to cost 7-8 times, or at the least 8-9 times more than what we are doing. And third, we are displacing the land mass, and there is ecosystem there too. We have living organisms there, and the last but not the least, safety issues. So we tried to, present our views, and now the Indian government has officially filed for requesting modification to the judgment, and we are hopeful that we will receive a positive response and some relief from the Honorable Supreme Court. But the thing I want to make it very clear, and this is something that we've been telling, and this might be my 60th or 70th interview about GIB in the last 2 years, that it is our duty as a renewable energy generation ecosystem to ensure that whatever flora and fauna is there, that coexists with the renewable generation plants. We want to ensure that it's not either or, it's both. And the industry is committed to do everything in its might to ensure that it happens.
I was coming to that. You mentioned the case studies that you have done in different countries where birds of similar species or other species have had been in the same area where renewable energy deployment is happening. What was the takeaway from these case studies? And do you think, at your own end, if any of these can be replicated, in what way? And if you can also give a cost comparison on that.
So let's take an example of the same Great Bustard issue where there was power line collision of bustards in the African countries. They used bird diverters there, and these bird diverters were helpful in bringing the collision rate by almost 80%. And in Europe, when similar bird diverters, but different, there in bird diverters too, there were different geometries. I don't want to geek out on the geometry of bird diverters, but some circular bird diverters, cylindrical bird diverters. When these things were spiral ones, when these things were used, the effect was more. And in some cases, the collisions were reduced by almost 95%. So that is the kind of success rate we saw in Europe and in Africa. And there are some countries where other set of birds were there, and in US they even tried to use ultraviolet paint to paint the transmission lines so that the birds can see it and they can stay away from the lines. So solutions exist, and we are in the century where innovation is at the forefront of everything. And in India, if you ask, I don't think there'll be dearth of solutions in these kind of things. Now on the cost side, yes, of course, it will be a little bit costlier to adopt these things. I can easily tell you that we have been working internally as a federation. We have represented the ministry that why don't you come up with the standards? Why don't you come up with the standards of, let's say, the bird diverters or the make of it, the dimensions of it, the specifications of it, so that we can have them manufactured in India and we can use them and we can have this process fully streamlined. And we received some positive response. We have formally requested CEA also to come up with standards for these bird diverters, and we are hopeful that we will be able to implement that. On the cost front, I don't have exact figures on how costly it would be, but it will definitely add to the expenditure of the transmission line ecosystem. But I can tell you with full confidence that the industry has no second thoughts on it. Everyone is ready to do it, and you'll be surprised to know that some of them are already doing it.
That's great. But for my understanding and as well of that of the listeners, two things that you hear when this matter is discussed is first, that why that particular piece of land, why can't it be shifted? Second is that what is the harm in taking the lines underground? I want you to address this issue giving me some data that how much is that potential, how much is the land which is in question right now, and can it be shifted? If yes, why? If not, then why? Second question is that what is the harm in taking the transmission line underground? And again, I want you to address it both in terms of the infrastructural hurdle and also the cost part here.
Sure. So why is this land that important is the question, first question. So if you look at the area, like I mentioned, India's radiation map, if you see, we have the highest radiation in this particular area. The Rajasthan part, the Shekhawati region, the inside region, inner regions of the western side of Rajasthan, and some extent Gujarat have the high potential. Now, in terms of the area where the GIBs are prevalent, it can be quantified as priority and potential. Priority where the prevalence of GIB is very high, you find them very often, and that's where they are present. That's around 13,163 square kilometer. And the potential area where there are sightings of GIB occasionally or periodically, and that area is around 78,580 square kilometer. Now, Why is this area important for solar energy? Number one, this is the highest potential for ground mounted solar installation in the country. Second, this is a arid region, right? And we just spoke about how land is a very, valuable resource, and how we are trying to save our usable land or cultivable land and using arid land and unused land for solar installations. So this is the classic example of having this much square kilometers of land that is predominantly arid. Some of it is grasslands, of course, the priority area, which can be used for solar installations or renewable installations in general. So there goes the answer. Why is this land that important? We are not only thinking from energy generation perspective, but we are also thinking from the land use perspective and the ecological perspective. And the second part of your question is, why are we not shifting or something? See, if you look at it, we have tendered as of today in our country, 52 gigawatt is installed and 48 gigawatt has been tendered out and is different stages of implementation. Out of that 48 gigawatt, I can tell you just at the back of the envelope calculation, 60% of it is coming from this area or will come from this area, 60 to 70%. That's almost 25 to 30 gigawatt. Why? Again, land availability, resource availability, the levelized cost of energy will be less, the intensity of solar radiation is higher. So these are all factors that help or that prompt developers to choose this land. Now, once the project is awarded, once the PPI is signed, and once the construction has started, at this moment, to shift from here to some other place is definitely out of the question. Now, the second part of your question is like, why can't we underground the lines? Haven't people undergrounded the lines? Yes, of course. In our own country, we underground lines. But those are not the high kilowatt, 110, 440, 765 kilowatt lines. Those are smaller voltage lines which are used in our urban transmission systems or extended arms of our urban transmission systems or evacuation infrastructure. This for distribution. So if you look at why we shouldn't or why we can't underground, again, 3 points in favor of that. One, technicality. We have tried, we have tested, we have seen across the world, even in the wake of hurricanes in US, they still opted to not underground high tension lines. Not because that they don't have enough money or resources to do it, because it's not technically feasible to do it. Number two is, of course, the economical concerns. The average cost of per kilometer of transmission lines when we underground will increase at least 8 to 9 folds compared to the overhead lines. Let's ignore the number one and number two. Let's go to the third point. Safety concerns. Today, these areas, have some of them have frequent people movement. Some of them have, I don't know, maybe some rare reptiles or some microorganisms or some other plants, flora in this area. One, you will be displacing the land for them and then again adding it. And then second is like, it's not safe to have that kind of transmission lines undergrounded. So these are the three reasons why we are very much vehemently opposing undergrounding. For low voltage lines, it's fine. Everyone has done it. But for evacuation, for transmission, where we have high voltage lines, it's very difficult. And I'll give you one more, thing to support my argument. The Supreme Court has formed a committee for this GIB thing where you have to approach this committee to see or validate whether your undergrounding is feasible or not. And then if this committee deems that underground is not feasible, then they will give permission for overhead with bird diverters. And the committee did give permission for high voltage lines. A couple of them have approached and they did receive permission for going ahead with overhead with bird diverters. So what else can be a more testament than this? This is predominantly the main cause of concern. Mostly when we look at this argument, people always talk on the cost perspective, but cost is my second part. My first part is always a technology. As an engineer, if it's technologically feasible, if we Indians can find a way to bring it down the cost. But technical feasibility and safety are, of course, of paramount importance. And that is the sole reason why we, as an industry body, after consulting some of the key experts in the sector who have served in the government and private sector, have decided to represent this concern to both the government, and we did it to Supreme Court before too and NG to before, but we did it to the government.
So if you can explain in layman term, what is the per unit cost escalation that we are seeing because of this delay, now that the projects are delayed, right, as you mentioned? What is the cost escalation there? And also, if all these projects were supposed to take their transmission line underground, then what is the per unit cost implication?
So now see, we should also understand that some of the projects that were going to come up in this region are those which have achieved record low tariffs. That's because of the advantage of this location and the resource availability and the technology of modules they're using. So as of now, if we were to underground them, like I said, the costs going to increase very, very disproportionately. I can't give you an exact figure, but the minimum visibility on the tariff is going to be, I mean, I can't even begin to imagine the figure that I'm going to tell you, but it's going to be significantly high than any other conventional tariff that we have achieved, because we have to agree to the fact that renewable energy projects have been successful in our country because A, access to capital, B, our solar resource. So both of them have been key fundamental pillars that were driving our renewable energy prices. Now the auxiliary factor of transmission, when it comes into the picture, it's going to destroy the balance of the equation, leave IRRs. I don't think the project becomes viable if we were to underground the lines. So that is one of the key concerns that we had from the beginning, and we have represented that. But in terms of the cost implication, like I said, it's 8 to 9 times per square kilometer, and transmission forms a good chunk of a project cost. So there goes your answer. I'm very, very carefully not giving you the exact figure because it's difficult to get the figure out. And if the figure is out, then it's something no one believes. But yes, it has wider implications.
Got it. This particular issue has also brought to fore another debate altogether about green energy projects specifically. Traditionally, infrastructure projects or conventional energy projects have had a very strict mandate for land conservation, for environmental impact assessment, something that the green energy projects have traditionally gotten away with. But now there is a pressing demand from all across, be it environmentalists, be it sector experts. Everyone is asking that there should be stringent norms for solar and wind project when it comes to land, when it comes to flora, fauna, and this particular issue in itself, given that these projects were awarded and then this issue came up, says a lot about the policy atmosphere, if I may say so. Can you first explain the whole policy availability in this case when it comes to environmental impact assessment for green energy project? Where all it is lacking, and where do you think green energy and ecology can meet in between?
Well, it's a sort of I would say, a juxtaposed situation because, renewable energy primary motive is to save the environment. So I'm sure we are doing everything we can to do that. But and I also would like to beg to differ or disagree on one of the points that you mentioned. We don't have so lenient approval process too. We still have to go through a lot of strict approvals for getting one piece of land. But I understand where you're coming from. On a comparative basis, we might have lesser things to go through than infrastructure, but that doesn't mean we don't have anything to go ahead. But let us look at it from two perspectives. One, the gigawatt scale parks that we envisaged to build, the shift in the policy happened very recently. Before that, we had a different way of doing things, different plan for the structure of India's solar energy mix, and now there's a different plan. So things are evolving with that. And as you mentioned in the beginning, that we are in nascent stage, and in any domain, even if it's as mature as telecom or infra or automobile, policy evolves, and we are not an exception there. Now, whether the policy environment surrounding renewables has to become more environmentally conscious or not, well, I can answer that question as a policy advocate, but not as a policy maker. That we are in the process of, I think the government is in the process of bringing out some norms, and make no mistake, there are still strict norms on that particular front. Now, from the industry side, we have been trying to, advocate for more sustainability and environmental component in solar plants too. While we are a solar plant, we have already covered the E part of ESG, and to some extent S part also, the sustainability part. But in that aspect, how to make it more sustainable is something that we are also looking at. That today you'll see a lot of solar plants in the country are in favor of growing vegetation below the panels for different reasons. That is also something that we are advocating on another side. On the second side, we are also seeing how some of the developers are also very conscious and sensitive of the existing flora and fauna there, and how to accommodate them, or what are the alternatives, because we should also understand the fact that international investors and Indian investors also have their own policies of ESG, so no one can escape from that. Having a policy is okay, that you have a directive, but you have something that is internal too, which has to be complied to. And I see that all said and done, Indian renewable system is very, very compatible in terms of the ESG part. Now from the government side, yes, in the initial days our policies were different in an extent, and today we are seeing that there is an increasing narrative surrounding the environment impact assessment of renewables. And frankly speaking, as a national advocacy body, we would definitely be like to be part of the narrative. And I'll tell you what we are doing already as a part of narrative. We have requested the ministry to set up a committee which will examine the possibility of having cultivation below the solar panels in all existing plants in the country. This is one part of agro we are trying to tell the government. Here you have two advantages. One, predominantly, like I said, our solar generation ecosystem is in arid regions which have less vegetation cover. Now we use the land for developing solar plants. But because there is solar, now because of the shade there is, and there are studies in Japan, Italy, Germany and France, which is in favor of the argument that vegetation now can grow below panels, because even in arid regions too, and specific vegetation, maybe commercial crops like aloe vera, lemongrass, commercial crops, tamarind, all these things can grow. So when you look at it from one angle, you are saying that an arid region which was not used has become a solar power generation system. Okay, fine. But I am using that arid region which is generating solar to co-locate the vegetation, which is increasing the land use ratio or land use effectiveness of that particular land. So this is the kind of things that we are suggesting the government. And believe me, there is a huge reception of this from the industry. There are many examples in the country where in megawatt scale, gigawatt scale parks, people, developers, in coordination with the farmers and agriculturists are examining this. See how the circle is closed. We are here to protect the environment, and we are using the arid lands, and we are making it cultivable, and we are cultivating crops there. So it's giving double the amount of benefits to the nature than it could have ever done when the land was arid and unoccupied. So this is one of the things that we are trying to do. But on the other front, we are in regular touch with MOEFCC and all, and we believe that the industry's commitment is well conveyed to the ministry through the policymakers, that this is what we are planning to do, this is what we have done. And in GIB case too, like I mentioned, we told to the ministry that we don't want any support from you. We are ready to have an industry funded breeding program for GIBs in that area. This is the kind of initiatives that we are ready to take as an industry. And if there are any rules and laws to be complied with, we are ready to go ahead on that front.
With all my sensitivity towards this GIB issue, I want to take a different perspective on this and ask you, renewable sector in India continues to be very, very cost sensitive. So from the point of view of a project developer, these are cost implication, bird diverters, crops, having an elongated stand over solar panels so that there could be vegetation, and several other things that you mentioned. These are additional technology, additional cost, which in turn reflects on your final tariff. So how receptive is the industry for this? And also, is there an argument which supports that this is for their long-term benefit? And how receptive is the local population for such ideas, or local government as well as state governments?
So let us take it from two different fronts. One, on the bird diverters front, whatever the cost addition is, the industry is of course ready to bear it and spare no means there, because it is the bird is of national importance, and as we promised, we will ensure that the bird is not extincted. That is something that we are very committed about. On the other side of it, like you mentioned about the agri PV or this thing, there the trade-off is pretty much self-explanatory. Like for existing plants, if you are doing vegetation below that, the returns that come out of the crop, you can break even your investment in like 2 3 years or 3 4 years based on the land and the crop and the variety that you've chosen. For new plants for agri PV, again, it's writing on the wall. We have seen a lot of case studies not only abroad but in India. NSEFI prepared a report with IGF. We visited 13 agri PV plants in the country, which were set up, 4 of them in Gujarat, and the Gujarat being the highest state with the highest number of installations. And the cost economics work in the favor of, of the developers, of the farmers, of the nature, of everyone. Now, if you look at Kusum Component A, government's flagship scheme for farmers, Agri PV is essentially a component of it, where between 500 kilowatt to 2 megawatt can be installed on farmlands. That is like from the farmer's perspective, because government has a vision to double the farmer's income. So while you are earning income from the crop, you'll also earn income from the power that is generated from the solar panels installed on your field. So there you have asked a very interesting, or rather you pointed out a very interesting stakeholder on the local people and the farmers. I think that's where we need to focus more on. Awareness is something that is lacking on that front, and I think why we are unable to achieve success when it comes to that particular part of that scheme. We have huge potential, and our report, we said if 1% of our agriculture lands can switch to agri PV, we will have 165 gigawatt of solar on agriculture lands alone. That's 50% of our 300 gigawatt target by 2030. So that's huge. And 1% of land in India is nothing. We'll have that for breakfast. So that is something that we should, focus on, rather, emphasize on. And I'm very happy. We are in regular touch with the ministry, and I'm very happy about the developments. The ministry has dedicated PSUs to look into this particular awareness in different states. And we are also parallelly now having our awareness on rooftop, and we are trying to take Kusum also into it. We want to sit with the local farmer cooperatives, of the NBFCs in farming sector, the learned people, as well as the farmers themselves, to help them understand what it is. One main apprehension they have is about their land, and once we are able to clear that, I think we will be an example. And there's a very interesting conjecture here, that on the global scale, if you look at the countries whose predominant part of GDP comes from agriculture, are the countries where the renewable penetration is very low. Lowest. The top 10 countries, you take them, they have the lowest renewable penetration. And if we are able to address that part, the water, energy, food nexus, we are going to solve all the 3 problems in one go. So that is something that we are trying to plan. But all in all, to answer your question, state governments are also very receptive, industry is receptive. We have seen some states coming up with the tenders themselves. Chhattisgarh has come up, MP, Rajasthan is the first state to come up with the tenders. Punjab also is coming with the tenders. So Uttarakhand, I saw some tenders on agri PV. So the sensitization is happening on state level too. But if we are able to take the message to the common masses, it's going to be a huge thing. And last but not the least, we are giving the farmer who is in the remotest corner of the country to be part of this fight against climate change. And what can be better than that?
I'll go to a very macro issue, just land in general, in context of our target of 500 gigawatt, which we have to achieve by the end of this decade, according to our commitments in the COP26 climate conference. And me and you both know, in this country, land is, first of all, finite. Second, there are multiple issues involved, state level, central level, local level. How, as an industry, do you envisage a target of 500 gigawatt with so many troubles just across land? I'm not talking about any other troubles, just land.
Well, India, all said and done, is a land of opportunities, and pun definitely intended. And if you look at the way the 500 gigawatt target is envisaged, we are looking at one aspect of grid connected large scale, but there's another huge unexplored, potentially, highly influential sector of solar, which is distributed solar. And for that, I can start with something as simple as rooftop, and go to something as complicated as building integrated photovoltaics, or go to something as new as floating PV, or something that is as trivial as canal top. All these things exist. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are not saying this is new. This is existing already in the ecosystem, in the very own country we live in. So these I see are going to be the driving factors of India's 300 gigawatt of solar energy target or 500 gigawatt of renewable energy target. Now let's break down one by one. Rooftop sector is the most untapped sector today in the country. You will not believe I have statistics that say if we are only able to target below 2 kilowatt, only 2 kilowatt, 2 kilowatt is nothing today for our country. At least for you and me in urban areas, 2 kilowatt we burn in an hour. If we only target 2 kilowatt of rooftop and take lowest of the lowest 1% of penetration rate, our rooftop installation generation from 2 kilowatt and below systems alone has a potential of 139 gigawatt. 139. That's half of our target. That is the potential of our rooftop. Let's go to the urban sector where we have 5 to 10 kilowatt or 5 to 15 kilowatt. And again, I'm taking only 1% of it or maximum 10% of the total existing chunk. There, the potential is almost as much as 98 to 100 gigawatt. For the bigger segment, that's an ocean. Today, out of 10 odd gigawatt of rooftop capacity installed, 90% or 80% comes from commercial industrial rooftop establishment. Why? Because power is costlier in the C&I sector and they opt for solar. And that's a potential I don't need to drive. It drives on itself if there's an ecosystem that will facilitate it. So if you show me the land as a problem, I'm giving you the roof as a solution. And that is huge. So 109 or 100 gigawatt of less than 2 kilowatt and almost 100 gigawatt, you have 200 gigawatt already. And 100 gigawatt is already coming up. So I have touched 300. Let's keep rooftop aside. Let's go to the next part. Now we are having, our building construction is becoming innovative. I am seeing facades everywhere of late. And building integrated photovoltaics is something that's a huge thing that is already prevalent in Europe, very much extensively used in US and Australia. And why shouldn't India not have that fun? We should also try to see how we can integrate building integrated photovoltaics in the country. And I'm very happy our ministry has opened a new building and you should see it's covered with panels all across it. So it's not directly integrated, but it is to some extent integrated with PV. So that's an example. And if we have problem on land, let's use the buildings that we already have, and that facade is of no use. So let's use it to make electricity and money both. So that is the second aspect we have. Third most important part, and I won't say this has huge potential in the country, but it can contribute a humble 20-30% to our total target. That's on the floating PV. And we are fortunately blessed with good water bodies. Stagnant water bodies, not the flowing ones. And they are pretty much in control throughout the year. Why don't we use them? And it helps both ways. It's stopping prevention of algae, it's stopping accumulation of bacteria, and it's helping you to increase your power generation. I was told just a couple of days back that 9% extra power is generated on a floating PV compared to a normal ground mounted PV because it's on water. So you are solving your land problem, your power generation is increasing, your water body is safe. It's like the holy trinity. Now let's come to the other side of the distributed solar. Today, all said and done, we have to prepare for having infrastructure which is disaster resilient. No doubt in that. And when I talk about infrastructure being disaster resilient, first and foremost, my focus goes to power infrastructure. We need to be able to have our mission critical infrastructure in the country be powered anytime, irrespective of any natural calamities or disasters. For that, you need mobile generation systems with storage. Today in India, our installed diesel genset capacity is 90 gigawatt, 90. As a country, we are still dependent on diesel for 90 gigawatt. Imagine if I replace the diesel with solar. I'm getting 100 gigawatt only from here. And these are all distributed. Imagine the kind of generation I'm adding into the grid. At the same time, the pollution I'm taking away. And we need more mobile generation sources, more nano grids, more microgrids that can help us be prepared in case of disasters, be natural disasters especially, earthquake, floods. power is the immediate thing that we look into. Telecom, even including telecom to telecom towers need power. While communication is the key, electricity is the key for communication. So we need to be, I think we should start preparing or start building this shadow renewable generation portable systems in key sites of our country. And that potential, like I said, 90 to 100 gigawatt, which can help us be ready in case the worst happens or hits us. Apart from this, I'm sorry, I'm trying to going back to agri PV again and again because that's very close to my heart. Like I mentioned, land is an issue. We have so much agriculture land which is cultivable. Let's take 1% of it, you have 160 gigawatt of solar already. So the target is good. And I'm telling you, if we do all the things that I said, we will cross for 600 gigawatt of solar only without having any land problems. But yeah, we should try to target this to achieve that. But our target is in safe hands. We have technology ready. Everything is cost effective. We have people or industry who is in the sector very aggressively. You name the sector. Agri PV, we have top companies. Floating PV, we are the hub today. Building integrated PV, of course, we are learning. Rooftop, who can beat us in terms of technology? Our companies go and execute in different countries. And if we are able to tap our potential, then we are gone. And today now there is hybrid where you can have sort of an integrated structure on your roof under which you can just have your chairs or have a swing and just enjoy the view. That it's not conventional PV, it's not conventional rooftop, it's integrated into a structure. And recently I've seen one more carport which had fully integrated panels that were laid on it. That is the future for us. And there will be no girth of rooftops in our country if that becomes a solution. And I'll tell you that it's a matter of sometimes I'm embarrassed when we go to public platforms. We are the 5th largest country in the world. And I'm hoping before the calendar changes, we'll become number 4. And our distributed or rooftop capacity is not even 10% or 15% of our total installed capacity, while the other countries have 60 to 70%. So that should change. So changing that will solve the land problem and all other problems. So in one sentence, if you ask me to summarize it, the sector has 99 problems, but land is not not one of them. Land is the one which is having, the key implications are there for land problem in the existing scheme of things. But if we are able to focus more on rooftop and distributed sector, then I don't think the next time we have this chat, maybe after 5-6 years when the podcast reaches 2000 episodes, we'll talk about different problem.
I hope we call you sooner. No, interesting you mentioned, and obviously not just this sector, any sector's technological innovations, which would be the driving force for change and bringing down cost, increasing penetration and awareness. Since some years lately, there have been very unique issues in this sector. One state, one fine day decides to cancel all renewable energy projects. Then one bird gives sleepless nights. There are environmental concerns, ecological land concerns, and as you mentioned, obviously there is a technological solution to a lot of these problems. Policies obviously keep changing given the nature of the democracy here, the nature of the federal structure, state governments, and everything. How does the investor sentiment look like to you amidst all these issues that are there?
That's a very interesting question. In fact, as I speak today, for the 4th consecutive year, we are ranked the most attractive destination for renewable energy investment. And we are still talking about problems. And I have a 426-page document which has every problem listed with the date of the problem, the date is discussed, the kind of action that's going on, what will happen if it is solved, what will have not solved, and what is the implication on it. Even then, for the 4th year again, we are the most attractive destination for renewable investments. And it might be a mystery for us, like how or why. I'll tell you one thing. If from my sort of 4 years of limited experience, we are very good at finding solutions as we are good at creating the problems in the first place. And we are very good at making simple things complicated. That's why we have ended up here in this current situation. But it's a learning experience for all of us. Second part is the commitment of the center government at the center means a lot to the world, to the investors, and to everyone in the sector. I think that has been the single driving force. Today, without that commitment, without them being stern, like you mentioned, the PPA renegotiation thing, we had nowhere to go. But central government stood very strong that this is not the way to do it. This is not going to do anything. This is illegal and you should take back. And they supported us. And today the judgment, 2 years passed, but still the judgment is in our favor. So that particular element carries, I don't know, we can't even elude a weightage to that compared to any other part. For investors part, you look at IRRs, risk factors, that and this. But the main resolve of the government is something that is very, very essential for investor sentiment. Second, equally important, to a large extent, the regulatory ecosystem in the country is very independent. And I carefully use the word large extent. That it's in itself is very unique to a very few countries in the world. So there will be no investor who will shy away from, not investing in India. And they are all having a fear of missing out, if I may say so. No investor wants to, miss the action that is going in Indian subcontinent today when it comes to renewables. Why? Because of the regulatory system, which is very thorough. Checks and balances is very thorough in India. So even if by chance there will be a government that will come and say, okay, I'm going to stop it, they can try by themselves, but they can't stop it. That's something that is very, very, I'm not saying that's unique to India, but that's what makes us very unique. Third, last but not the least, this is something that all of us are very well aware, that our judiciary too is independent and is known to deliver justice, even if it's late, but justice is delivered. So for any investor, if you have a government which is very strong, a judiciary that is independent, and a regulatory framework that is thorough, why will they not come to India? And the problems are, of course, these day-to-day problems, these are there. And when I talk to my German counterparts, when I talk to my American counterparts, their problems seem so third worldly to me. So that is, and I use the word very carefully. So that's how, as a system, we are evolving. And I'm very sure. And I hope one day my 426-page document condenses to 26 or 4. But even irrespective of that, the Indian sector will continue to grow. We'll try to find ways, we'll try to find means, we'll try to accommodate, and ultimately the frugal part of our innovation will always come to our rescue. And I mean it in a very positive way. And that's how I think investors see India as a country and Indian market as an ecosystem.
You are tempting me to come and see that 426-page report. I am absolutely sure it's not open for journalists, but I will somehow bribe my way to take a look at that. Great. Thanks for elaborating on that. And I'll move on to my last question, which I'd like you to elaborate if you can, or mince your words if you want to. Obviously you mentioned about a country being an attractive investment opportunity. That also comes from the fact because globally we are one of those few countries where energy demand is supposed to grow. We are an aspirational country where demand is growing, economy is growing, and that in fact has a bearing on our investment attractiveness, if I may say so. Investors aside, problems aside, given that you at the end of the day are a policy advocate, I would want you to list 5, if not 3 key policy changes or introduction that you think will change the face of this sector.
Well, it's a very tricky question because I can name 50, but if you say 3, maybe let me do it this way. Let me make it much more broader. So there are only 3 C's that we ask from the government at any given point of time. And if we are able to have those 3 C's, then there is nothing else that we need. First and foremost is consistency. When there is consistency in policy making, when there is consistency in terms of the way the policy is evolving, when there's consistency in the way policy is being made or policy is being sent, you have solved a lot of problems there itself. So consistency helps a lot when it comes to a sector, especially as dynamic as us. We agree. There's no one who's going to deny the fact that our sector is not a sector where you figure out everything on day one and then you can just start building factories. That's not the way. It evolves. Today we are at a very critical juncture We are transitioning from a government-driven, tender-driven demand to a market-driven demand. So here it becomes more and more important to have a consistent policy, consistent timing, consistent way of doing things. That's the first C. The second C, at the sake of being misunderstood, I would like to say is comprehensiveness. I agree, and I will be the first one to agree to the fact that we can't figure out all parts of the equation at first, but whatever we are trying to figure it out, we have to be very comprehensive in it and look at it from the perspective of what is already existing, what is coming up. Let's say there shouldn't be a regulation that will come today which will affect the projects that have already been installed, like half of the regulations that came today. That is retrospective implementation, and that does no good, not to the policy, not to the industry. So the comprehensiveness of a policy makes it not only beautiful but easy to implement and less hazardous in terms of the industry implications. And I use the word hazardous very, very definitively. I have seen lot of to and fro in terms of existing policies. I can name them now itself. There's DSM, there's GNA, there's LPS. All of these things happened less than a month back, and I'm just only naming them. If you ask me for 2 years, the list goes on and on. If we are not being comprehensive, if we are not covering all the ends, and if we are thinking to implement some policy retrospectively, some policy prospectively, then we will be literally at crossroads. The last C, the most important C, which not only for the sector but everyone else, is the clarity, visibility. It will be very good for everyone if things are spelled out rather than left to interpretation. Everyone can interpret it in their own way. And second, visibility should be there. The government or any policymaker, we are not asking them to make all policies today. You tell us, okay, I'm giving you a clarity. Okay, for 1 year, this is going to be. For next 4 years, this is it. For next 6 years, this is it. You come back after 1 year and say, I think 1 year is fine. Let's go ahead with the second one. We're fine. But that kind of visibility is what we want. See what happened with BCD. Classic example. 9th March 2021, we were told April 1st, 2022, you're going to have BCD. From now onwards, when you bid, keep BCD into consideration. Simple. Nothing else. We had a visibility of 1 year. We know after 1 year, I'm going to get BCD. Now, what happened to projects that were bid before and why are we asking BCD grandfathering? Different story, another podcast. But here, when it comes to this, the clarity or the visibility part is something that we are always looking for. And I must say, all the 3 C's, I won't say we have brought in the change in the government, or I won't say that it was not existing before. But if it is existing, it can be better. And it is definitely existing. And to some extent, some sub-segments of the government are very, very exceptional in executing all these 3 C's. And you see the result. You put the Indian solar installations in a map, you see the high hotspots where this potential is, and you'll see they are in those states where these 3 C's are very well. And there are other states where you'll not see anything. So that's a testament of it, nothing else. So these are the only 3 C's that I believe. But if you still want me to name 3, I can still go ahead. So
No, I like this very subtle yet good comprehensive answer. Your answer has all the 3 C comparing these. So, and I like the subtle way in which you said that how and where the progress is happening. And I hope wherever this progress is happening, it is replicated across the country as well. Thank you so much for talking in so much detail, for covering such pertinent issues that are in the sector, sharing your own experiences, because nothing beats than sharing your own experience. So thank you so much again for joining us here, for sharing your experience, your knowledge, and I hope we keep on engaging and we'll soon have you here. And next time we'll discuss more solutions than problems, hopefully.
thank you very much, Shreya, for having me here. I must say this is a fanboy moment for me, being in the podcast that I listen to every day. So, and yes, hopefully next time when we speak, we'll speak of more solutions and land not being one of them.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the India Energy Hour. Subscribe to this channel to never miss an update. To drop us a feedback, visit our website or write to us at theindiaenergyhour@gmail.com. We are on Twitter you can follow at TIEH_podcast and get in touch with the two hosts at Shreya_Jay and at Sandeep Pai with double I.